Adrenaline Radio. My name is Fred Blanchard, host of Adrenaline Motorsports on 1680 AM on your dial. This evening we have an in-studio guest, Gary Richards from Bonneville fame, and we're going to have some conversation with him and regarding projects and when everything started in the early years of land speed racing. The uniqueness of our guest tonight is that it wasn't a four-wheel vehicle that he ran. It was a motorcycle, too. Gary, basically what I'd like to do is kind of go over a little bit of your history and with Bonneville, and then there's some other things I want to touch bases on. I know that you are the manufacturer of an early-style flathead Ford cylinder head that's quite unique to the sport. I would say sport, but it's really the early days of hot rodding. But we're going to talk a little bit about the Bonneville thing that we've talked about. I know that when you first got involved, you were fairly young, and you were running. What kind of a motorcycle were you running, Gary?
My first motorcycle was a 125cc Pooch. It was a factory road race motorcycle that at 11 years old my mom had purchased for me.
And how did that go? I mean, was it something that you had to actually build yourself, or was it something that was you had some help with? How did that come about?
Well, that was just a factory road race motorcycle that my parents allowed me to run at Pomona with in 1952. It wasn't real fast, 69 miles an hour, I believe. It seemed fast to me at the time.
Well, it certainly was. If you were running at drag races, I can tell you that. It seemed like you talk about having wind in your hair. That certainly would be it for sure. We were also talking about how you moved along from that particular bike onto bigger and better things. Why don't you kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
The second bike I had was a 350cc that Dad tweaked a lot, and it was my little street bike, but 86 miles an hour and a quarter mile. Then with a little nitro in it, we went 96 miles an hour and a quarter mile. Then we stepped up to the 650cc, Dad's fuel bike that he had always run from the early 50s.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your dad. Why don't you give us a little bit of history on your dad and how he, what the things that he achieved back in the day when he got involved. I guess there were different organizations or sanctioning bodies back in those days for running the bikes that you ran. I think you mentioned that besides SCTA and BNI, there were other organizations running simultaneously with the Bonneville Speedway. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
That's right, Fred. The American Motorcycle Association, the AMA, they were the sanctioning body at the Bonneville Speed Trials. Dad, in 1952, set a record of 149 miles an hour, but there wasn't a distinction at that time between streamlined and open bikes. The folks from Texas, Stormy Magnum and Jack Wilson, they went 214 miles an hour, which kind of blew Dad out of the weeds.
Were they more sophisticated, or
well, it was a full streamlined shell.
Oh, I see.
So I don't know if the engine was any better or not. They didn't run it open, but Dad kind of packed it in. He said, you can't compete. And then they changed the rules so that there was a distinction between full streamlined and the standard frame motorcycle.
What kind of engines were available back in those days, Gary?
Well, there was every conceivable kind. There was, the Germans had theirs, and the English and the American stuff, and there weren't any Japanese bikes in the 50s anyway. The Harleys were very fast at the drags and at Bonneville, and as were the Triumphs. The Harleys had a much larger motor.
But they'd come through an evolution on their own. There were a lot of different designs in their particular product. What was the favorite engine that you decided to run and what you were doing?
Well, Dad seemed to like to make a small motor work, so he stayed with a 650cc and a 500cc. And we were fairly successful at the drag racing venues, Oregon and California.
What drag strips did you run back in those days? I know that there probably some of them don't even exist today.
Well, that's very true. Colton was one, and Santa Ana, Orange County, San Fernando, Saugus, Irwindale, and before Irwindale, across the way was San Gabriel River Grade drag strip. And then the ones in Oregon were Aurora and Scappoose.
Wow. See, there's a lot of history there, Gary. I could tell you that to run on those strips in those days and in those given conditions, people really don't understand the early drag strips as we see them today. They're behemoth. They've got big stands for everybody, comfortable seating, and huge pit areas, and well paved and well maintained, and tremendous amount of crew people out there taking care of the course. And I'm sure that wasn't the case when you guys came along.
Yeah, not at all. Usually it was, on the bikes anyway, it was, if you didn't have a trailer, you threw it in the back of a pickup truck. You had a couple of fuel cans in the back of the truck or in the trunk of your car. Yeah, the pit crew was usually volunteer kind of guys that just wanted to hang in there with you and participate.
What stirred you to what kind of pointed you toward the dry lakes? Kind of where did that come from?
Well, that came from we'd moved from Southern California to Oregon, and my dad just had an itching to, after I'd had some success at the drag strips, one top eliminator twice up there, that he'd like to go back to the salt. First year, I broke his whole record of 149, and instead of just a few hundredths more, 149 point whatever that was, I don't recall. And a couple of years later, I guess the next year, we boosted it up to 159 for a totally open 650cc motorcycle.
So that basically, that was now open bike, right? Is that correct?
That was open bike, and that kind of whetted my
appetite. Yeah.
For it. Yeah, I got exposed to the Streamliners and the Summers Brothers and Mickey Thompson and all the superheroes of the day.
Well, I know that there were a lot of neat people you had around you. I know in the early years you mentioned a few names, and I was wondering. So what were the materials available back in those days to start building, or you're actually instigate the idea of building a streamliner? Kind of, how did that come about?
Well, I saw that Joe Dudak had purchased from the Air Force a wing tank for an F-104 fighter. So that kind of instigated my searching around to see what I could find, and I found wasn't a wing tank per se, it was a camera pod full of microwave equipment at the surplus store. That was the base of what I built mine around.
Boy, I'll tell you, that must have been a real treat to figure that out. Was there really elaborate design work back in those days? How did that come about? Because I know what I'm familiar with here today, I certainly wasn't, I think, available back in those days as far as creativity. Tell me how you came about with all of that.
Well, I'm sure it was influenced by all the car designs and the existing motorcycle designs. Most of the motorcycles at the time were, surprisingly enough, using half-inch tubing to build their chassis out of. One of which we were discussing the other night was made out of half-inch electrical conduit.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah, if he had crashed, it would have been very exciting. I elected to make it out of 1-inch tubing, mine, and a mild steel 09 wall and a 125 wall chromoly roll cage.
Where did all the skills come from to create this kind of a project? Where did you have any people there kind of giving you a little guiding hand here?
I bounced things off Bob Summers because I kind of helped in their project, kind of as a gopher. And he would say, no, don't do this or don't do that. And
well, he's an icon in land speed racing, of course.